word, raise your hand. This is a word jumble. Raise your hand when you recognize a word up there. Come on, you guys. What word? When you recognize a word. Ah, I said don't say it. Just raise your hand. Do you know that most vision problems are problems of omission? Kraskin used to talk about that. We omit to see something. No, I'm just joking with you. But it's guitar, right? How long did it take you to get that? A little bit of work, wasn't it? What about if I tell you something that the next slide is going to be musical instruments? And I want you to tell me what the words are now, okay? Next slide, and as soon as you see them, say them, okay? Go. Whoa, you guys are really fast. You're fast learners, aren't you? Why were you able to get the words so quickly? Because you had context. You know what it's about, don't you? Right? All right, now, that the brain learns to read it all attests to its remarkable ability to sift through seemingly confusing input and establish patterns and systems. For a few children, this process comes naturally. Many have to be taught. But how about recovery? Deutsch talks about neurons that fire together, wire together. But also likewise, neurons that fire apart, wire apart. So visually, letters are essentially the same, but sounding them out is inconsistent. Another aspect is nonsense words. There are some actually educational programs that have you practice on nonsense words. If I was to practice nonsense words, would that be more beneficial or practice on real words? Real words, right? That means something to us. All right. Now, many of you have seen this before. You take this called an anagram. You take all the middle letters and mix them up. So let's read it together, okay? According to research at an English university, the order of letters in a word doesn't matter. The only important thing is that the first and last letters are in the right place.
Every letter by itself, but instead we visually recognize words as a whole.
Wow! Yay! Woo! Isn't that amazing how much you can read even if the order of the letters are messed up? It's the same thing with reading. Reading and also with language. Now, here's an interesting thing. This is that same activity. And what they did was they did a functional MRI, looked at changes in the brain processing over time. So they had the initial one where the words are correct, right here. So when the words are correct, this is the area of the brains that were functioning when they were looking at them. When they had the words with the letters mixed up, this is what they were. Now if there's a difference between reading that and reading with the correct words, you subtract the two and you'll see differences in brain processing, right? Look here. There is no difference in brain processing between the two. That means you use the same brain processes to read both the words that were mixed up and the normal words. Interesting, huh? Okay. Now, where is reading located? A single area? Not likely. A single neural network? Maybe some neural networks would be more likely. Long pathways, right? Remember we said about head injury. Long pathways are disrupted. Reading requires longer pathways. Multiple neural networks working in unison to provide outcome. What happens when one area is disrupted? Can other areas make up for the loss or fill in? And do you lose a specific aspect of reading? So usually what happens is when you have ocular motor skills and localization skills, a lot of times that makes it, in regards to your reading, being more of a laborious activity, harder to do, just poor efficiency. Now, automaticity, normal patterning, developing an automated response requiring less neural processing and energy or blood flow. Example, learning to drive versus driving while simultaneously eating on the cell phone. So again, this process of automaticity and loss of automaticity. These head injury patients lose the automatic processes of reading. Again, this is the functional MRI that we showed earlier.
이거 점심 먹고.
Again, here, areas lit up. When you do something, develop automaticity. Now, let's take a look again. We talked about right and left brain activities, right? We talked about subcortical, cortical, and also two contra-Q injuries. Now, let's take a look by Stephen Covey here. He says, to begin with the end in mind means to start with a clear understanding of your destination. It means that you know where you're going to, that you can now better understand where you are now so that steps can be made of this along the right direction. So if we know where we want our patients to go, into reading, let's say, we need to know where we want to be with that so that then we can help them find some skills to do so. Neural networks are they more localized or combinations? We talk about visual skills. Span of recognition can be a factor. Speed of processing can be a factor. So again, there's multiple different factors that come into the reading process. Some will say that the learning how to read is one of the most complicated things you learn in your lifetime, right? Learning how to talk is pretty complicated, but learning how to read is even more complex because it includes learning how to talk. Now let's take a look. What we talked about print was approximating print. What do we have? It includes vision, yes? Vision, sight word knowledge, phonological awareness, arousal, memory, ability to attend, background knowledge, vocabulary, spoken language. So really think about that. How much does reading really include brain processing? It's pretty much everywhere in the brain. So what we're going to look at is what can we do in this area of the realm of the patient to try and help them, give them some tools so that they can recover. This is a model that we use for the recovering reader. This is the curriculum we use. What do you do? Do you teach them how to do sounds first? You get them reading books? What do you do? Basic skills. That's your visual acquisition skills. Things like what? Accommodation, convergence, eye movements, those basic entrance skills that we use. Processes and strategies. What are those? How about if you're trying to learn the word Wednesday? How many of you say Wednesday?
Yes.
That is considered a strategy. So when you say Wednesday, what we do is what? We have a visual aspect that matches a verbal. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Most of your kids that are having problems with reading, they don't use strategies. They try to sound things out. If they're taught strategies, now they can implement them. The word business, bus-I-ness. Again, very simple things you can do to start putting memory and loading memory because you're getting two things that wire together, but also more importantly, you're seeing a pattern. So let's do one other thing, ignition. What's the other aspect of a lot of your head injury patients? Anxiety. So what happens is they get started and have anxiety about things. Again, if we can get them into the game, now we're going to get them involved in sustaining attention and recovery. Now, we talked about our basic processing skills, we talked about strategies, we talked about ignition, and then the curriculum. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you some curriculum things you can do. To evaluate these patients, we need our basic skills that we have. I would always include a DEM test, looking for visual verbal speed and saccadic eye movements, both. Visual field, we're going to consider that as an issue. Motion sensitivity. We're going to add some vestibular probes, like do the dynamic visual acuity test. We're going to also observe motor and postural control. Now, visual treatment considerations. We're going to give visual hygiene. What's the most common thing we talk about the first day? Blinking. Very important. If I'm reading and I'm going across the page, many patients start complaining about motion. Oh, the words are jumping off the page. They're not blinking enough also probably. Okay, and so what's happening is the print starts overlapping, you have some misperceptions, and things will appear to lift off the page. Lenses. Again, that may be beneficial for our patients. Low plus for our readers. Prisms, selective occlusion, visual rehab, and then what we're going to talk about today is basically reading recommendations and finish up. So refractive status, again, clarity, but we've been talking about VOR gain, spatial localization. Those are all components we have to think about day in and day out with our lenses. It's not what the lens does to the patient, but what they do with the lens. Again, remembering about monovision, concerns of refractive surgery. We have some of our surgeons that are doing LASIK and leaving patients in monovision. And then they have to go back after a stroke and get them equalized again. So basically we look down the road, accommodation. We know that amplitude is important. We know flexibility, turning it off and on. Let's say many of your head trauma patients are going to go back to school and get retrained in a different profession. They're going to be doing far near focus again. Again, that's flexibility of accommodation. They have to read for long periods of time, sustainability. So again, those are important considerations in the area of reading. Binocular vision, can they fuse? Do they have flexibility to be able to go from far to near? If they look at far and they keep their divergence excess and they're getting diplopia at distance, but then single at near, that's a concern. Again, sustainability, can they hold fusion for long periods of time? So again, you're going to do your basic evaluations, looking at your Fourier measurements. If it's a strabismus, you're going to document that, treat them for that. So we're going to treat all the basic visual skills that you normally would. Basic eye movements, again, range of movement. We're going to look at fixation, pursuit, saccades. Again, what I like to do is try to think about always documenting what? Documenting a ocular motor control so that we have a number for them. How fast is the processing speed? How well do they make saccades across the page? Last thing I really like, if we can, is do a readalizer on them. Do a readalizer on them, then we can go ahead and get data on their reading performance using age-appropriate materials. So if I have a head injury patient who is a high school graduate, but because of damage to the language area, they're reading now at first grade level, what tests do I give them on a visograph? I've got to go and give them a first grade reader. I can't give them an adult type of a paragraph. So those are some of the things you have to keep in mind. Many of these patients are going to even benefit more using a bookmark, an easy-to-see reader, or a slant board. Remember we talked earlier about it. You take a look at your piece of paper in front of you and it's laying flat, and then you tip it to yourself. Remember how much more comfortable it is? It makes even a bigger difference for head injury patients. Okay? And lastly, tracking and processing speed too. All right, now, compensatory strategies. Again, to get someone back in the game of reading, we may use some compensatory strategies. 1 finger, 2 fingers, 1 anchor finger. We'll take a look at these right now. Dr. Seuss, what does he say? The more that you read, the more things you will learn. The more that you learn, the more places you'll go. Okay? So interesting. All right. This is a single finger across. We have the patient and they're reading with the finger across. We go across. The problem usually in reading is what? The return sweep. Head injury patients, the same thing. So they get to the end, and when they jump back, they jump down one line or read the same line over again. So this technique, single finger across, can be helpful because it gets your attention to the page, but it does not help you on the return sweep. Again, return sweep is the big problem. Now, if I do a 2-finger technique, I keep the left finger anchored, follow across with my finger, and jump back to my finger. I have that anchor point, don't I? Very helpful for a lot of your head injury patients. So they do this, read across, jump back, read across, jump back, read across, jump back. Pretty nice way to work. Not very efficient though, but it can be very helpful for your patients to get them back into reading. So the next one is single finger technique. You hold the finger there, track across, jump back to your finger. The problem is when you go to this technique, you do this. John went to the store to pick up. Again, you're more likely to be reading word by word because your finger's not fast enough to keep up with your eyes. This technique, hold your finger here. John went to the store to pick up some groceries, returned sweet. Then he went down to Chestnut Street to visit his friend Ken. So again, much more efficient if my finger doesn't have to go across the page. So those are some things you can consider working with your patients on. Another one, a bookmark. Again, read across, slide over, read across. You've got to move this down the page though, don't you? Again, do patients with head injury dual task very well? Not in general. Some things they can do pretty good. But again, you may have problems with them being able to slide their hands down. Here is a red permanent marker with an overlay. So this is a piece of plastic with a red line, permanent marker. Here you read across and I can jump back to the next line, and while I'm reading this next line, I can bring the red line down because it's clear in the background. A little bit more dynamically easier, I think. So we make some of these, use these with some of our patients. What we'll generally do with our patients is we give them, do you like this? Oh yeah, that works really good. How about this one? I don't like that one. How about this one? We trial them, ask them which ones they like. We also use these Easy See readers too, where there's a color. What's nice about these is generally you can get 2 lines inside the color. If you have 2 lines of color, you finish the end, jump into the next line, and as you're reading the next line, you slide for the next line down. So again, a little bit easier for many patients. This one I do not like. It's called the open window reader. You read across in the thing. Now when you go ahead and jump back, I have to position this piece of paper on the next line. And I don't have anything visually to cue me in on it, do I? Really difficult. I cannot believe they even sell these. I think what happens is that they sell them, someone looks at them and they say, these don't work very good, and they toss them. And luckily there's enough people trying to figure things out that they probably sell them and then they throw them away, sell them and throw them away. I find them, the effort is futile, okay? I do not like using these. All right, now what about Kindle now these days? What happens if the patient's using the finger across the page, what happens? They jump pages all over the place, don't they? So you cannot use your finger with these. What can you use? Well, you could use an Easy See reader, not very efficient. You could use a probe like this, a little stick or an eraser. These usually work pretty good. So you do not allow them to use their fingers though. Let them go and use something else that has a small surface area where it can just scan across without picking up the text and shifting to the next page. Colored filters. What colors do you want to use? Well, here's the thing. If you take a look at most of the literatures out there, Solon has the best work, really, I think, suggesting that you use blue. Why do you use blue? It depends, probably for patient to patient. But blue, in some of Renshaw's work in the old OAP papers back in the 40s and 50s, blue acts like a plus lens. Aha! Blue color plus lens. That's an interesting phenomenon. So here's an interesting thing that happens. Sometimes I will try a patient reading with a plus 25, a plus 50, a plus 75, and I get no difference in performance in reading. So then I go, okay, how about a 37 or a 62? Any of you use 37 or 62s on your trial set? I'll try it once in a while. Sometimes I get a difference there. But very commonly, I may get someone who I use a plus 50 with who doesn't. If I add a blue filter with the plus 50, then their reading becomes smoother. So again, you can use color with a lens. It doesn't have to be just a lens or just a color. So blue gives you magnification. Now, how many times you got patients who do not accept plus at near? They're over accommodating at near. If you use a fused cross-cylinder test, they show minus relative to the refraction. When you get that, usually those patients like yellow. So when you saw the blue Easy See reader on my patients earlier, and the yellows usually work well for minus projection. the blues for standard accommodative issues. Now, differentiate for visual field loss. Remember, we have to decide visual field loss or neglect. We're going to look at confrontation fields, motion for those factors. We talked a little bit about draw clock already. Now, what would you rather have? Raise your hand if you'd rather have a right field loss. Raise your hand. How about a left visual field loss? How about neither? Okay, see, you guys are on to me. It's not working anymore. They're too smart for me, Charlie. What am I going to do?
It depends.
It depends, okay. That's dangerous. Okay. Right field loss. What happens is the span of recognition is an issue. Macular sparing, sometimes 1 to 5 degrees, okay? So the problem with right field loss is because I don't have a very large span of recognition. What's the problem with left field loss? The return sweep problem. Return sweep problem I think I'd rather have, because if I keep my finger at the edge, I can always look back to my finger, read across, back to my finger, read across. So I myself, if I had to make a choice, maybe left. But again, I agree with you, neither. So treatment considerations. Rotation of print. We talked about 90 degrees. Just to give you a thought about that. Makes sense, doesn't it? That's what we first started doing when we started dealing with some of these field cuts. But then we went to basically slight tilts. So if you have a hemanopsia, one thing you can try with your patients is rotating 90 degrees and reading either uphill or downhill. I always trial it with our patients. I want them to see the difference. Because think about this. If someone says do this, you're going to go, okay, I don't really like it. But if I say, try A, now try B, what do you prefer? You are now an active participant in the decision-making process, aren't you? Don't you feel better about yourself?
Yes.
In general, yes. So when we're doing another thought about doing therapy is, if you want a child or someone to do something and they don't want to do it, give them 2 different things that you want them to do. Let them make a decision between the 2, which one they like the most. You're winning. Why? You're still getting to do things that you want them to do. They are an active participant in the negotiation process, okay? So again, giving them several options, let them try 90 degrees, let them try a slight tilt, and say, which one do you like best between these? Another one with the left hemanopsias is using a felt marker on the side of the print, a highlighter pen actually. You can use that to the side. Again, let's review this. Right hemanopsia to me is the more issue. Digit span usually is 7 to 8 letters. Span of recognition, here's an interesting thing. There's some nice literature out there that came out of Microsoft, and they found that you may not be able to read 14 to 15 letters to the side, but outside your consciousness, you're actually using information 14 to 15 letters out there. They mask the information and determine this, okay? So it's not something that we would do normally clinically, but it's interesting that you're actually reading out this much at one time. But typically, you're picking up only 7 to 8 letters. Now, if you tilt material, you may pick up 5 to 7 letters versus 2 to 4 letters. If I only have 2 to 4 letters, I'm going to be seeing parts of words, aren't I? If I can tilt it and pick up 5 or 7 letters, now I might be able to pick up 1 word at a time, which will help me in efficiency in my reading. Inner hemisphere, remember sequential versus Washington. Some of your patients, again, with right-left hemisphere activities are going to have difficulty with sequential simultaneous processing. So a lot of times we will actually do work on spelling for some of our patients. Now the word Washington, how many letters is that? 10. Wow. Can you remember if I gave you 10 random numbers, could you remember them all? I wouldn't. But I could. Give me 1 10 times. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Got it. Okay, but again, if it's random, it's going to be trouble, isn't it? So what are we going to do with some type of reading activity with this patient or trying to work on spelling? I want them to start chunking information, to see patterns of words. So what we'll do is we'll do a Mars and ball activity. So you're going to have to visualize with me here. Mars and ball right in front of me, hanging from a string. Arm length right here. In front of me is the word Washington. I'm going to ask the instructional set for the patient or child, head trauma, depending on what it is I want you to say the word on the first hit and then spell it out. So they're doing this, Washington. W-A-S-H, watch my eyes, I-N-G-T-O-N, Washington. Now, what was I doing with my eyes? Was I looking up and down?
No.
I kept looking at the word, look back at the ball, look at the word, back at the ball. That takes a lot of effort. But if I do this, Washington, W-A-S-H-I-N-G-T-O, I only had to look up a couple times, didn't I? So what I'm trying to do with ball spelling activity like this with the Mars and ball is I want you to start looking for the patterns in the word. Because that's what's going to allow you another strategy for recall visual memory. It's also sequential, simultaneous. So if the child has to work at every letter, that's too much work. They usually say, I'm going to do it with the least amount of effort I need to. So they'll look up 2 or 3 times. So again, watch your patient's eyes, what they're doing. So the word is up there. I'll have the patient go over on this side now of the Mars and ball with my back to the word. Now do the same thing, but I might ask them, look up here. Can you look up here? Okay, thanks. Sorry. Look up here. Remember what the word looks like? The Washington, remember what it looks like? How many letters were in that first chunk?
2.
Letters. In Washington, the first chunk, how many?
2 letters.
4. How many in the middle chunk? 3. How many in the last chunk? 3. So what I'm trying to do is to change your process from remembering 10 separate items into the chunks of the words. So I'm asking her to visually manipulate. What do we do when we're doing eye-hand coordination activities? Visually manipulate things. Motor manipulation. We have sustained attention on the word. We're extending over time, putting something into memory. So we can work on ball spelling by first asking her to look up here, what's the 4 chunks? Now, let's say I've done it, look up here, Washington. Now, say the word, spell it again. Washington, W-A-S-H-I-N-G-T-O-N, Washington. Now, I'm going awful fast, aren't I?
Yeah.
When you have a Mars and ball, the key about a Mars and ball, it's a pendulum. You hit it, it goes out. W. A. What happens in that time between saying it? I can lose my attention, lose my place. That's the key about using time in therapy, is if you provide a time where they have to really sustain attention, which is therapeutic for them. Why? To load memory, that they can learn, that they can stay focused on things. So again, head injury, pediatrics, very similar in a lot of ways. So I've done the word, and we'll generally do the word without looking at it, okay? Now I want all of you to help me in this last piece. Remember what the word looks like? What's the very last letter in Washington? Don't look at the chart. N, next to last.
O-T-G-N-I-H-S-A-W.
Now, why were you able to do that? Was it verbal rehearsal?
No.
M-I-S-S-I-S-S-I-P-P-I. It's visualization.
Yes.
You're using sequential and simultaneous processing. You're remembering chunks of it. And you do pieces that are digestible, essentially. Okay? That's pretty cool, isn't it? So now what I would do a lot of times, I would just say, look at it, tell me what they are. Now do it with the ball. Washington. N-O-T-G-N-I-H-S-A-W, Washington. Now what happens a lot of times is they forget to say the word at the end. Why? Watch me. T-O-N. Whoa, I'm done. Oh, Washington. They're so excited to finish, they forget to finish the task, okay? So again, what we're looking at is using some activities like that with our children with learning issues, but we can also use them with head injury patients, helping to organize sequential and simultaneous processing, okay? All right, now, here goes with right hemanopsia. Let's say I have maybe only 3 or 4 word letter recognition. If I rotate it, I might be able to squeeze in 5 or 7 letters. Again, depends on patient and the amount of slant. More slant, more letters. But again, the more slant, the more kind of strange it is reading uphill. So we have the patient play with their books, work with it. Now, for those of you that have patients who have hemanopsias, this website is called readwrite.ucl.ac.uk. What is this? It's a site that you can direct your patient to, and I would have each of you, you should try it yourself. You go to the website and you do take a visual fields test. It will document your visual field, left hemanopsia, right hemanopsia. It collects data because they're trying to do research on reading and hemanopsia. Then what it does is you have access to reading material. All the Harry Potter books are on here. Most old books are on this. I've never seen a book that wasn't on there yet, but of course I'm not reading everything. But what it does is it has scrolling text. The variables are the size of the font, you control the background color, the color of the letters, and the speed of the letters going across the screen. So you can increase your span of recognition this way as well. So instead of having to make eye movements like John went to the store, it's John went to the store. So the text scrolls across where you're fixating at. The problem is what? When you blink, you might miss something. So you have to be a little bit careful while patients doing this. Okay? Try to add some blinking in there. But it's a nice thing, I think, because it really starts looking at helping address some of these issues as far as span of recognition and picking up reading speed. Text around the fixation may cause difficulty, so motion sensitivity again. This is where we used to have a time, she passed away a few years ago, Meryl Bowen, and used to talk about having issues with motion in the periphery. Again, a lot of these patients who state that their text seems to jump off the page will benefit with low plus, sometimes with binasal. Very common, they'll see it with low base in, and also bookmarks and easy to see readers. So if they're having issues with motion and sensitivity, it's not surprising that they'd have trouble with text as well. Binasal occlusion, we've already gone over this earlier. Global brain processing. Again, we've talked about head and neck and postural control. Again, the sliver input increases arousal for your patients who are reading. Remember, if you're starting to read, what happens to head movement? Very little head movement. They start getting tired, sleepy pretty easily. Here's an example of a slant board. Look at this patient here. She's one who's had a head injury. For her reading, what she's using is a Blue Easy C reader. But look at her neck. How long do you think she's going to last reading before she starts getting wiped out? Not very long. So what do? We give her a slant board. Again, extreme neck flexion, now much straighter, head over the middle midline. And we showed again here, capital extension with him. All right, we also discussed head movement again, active head movement. So here's something that happens is that when I go climbing, I always have one goal, carry lighter gear. So what happens, this is now my 3rd headlamp I've gone through. I lose an ounce usually about every time I get a new one. And our goal is, it costs, we figured out one day, it costs about $100 per ounce in equipment to decrease your weight of your pack. So we're always looking for lighter gear all the time. So anything we can cut down the weight, we do it. So this was my 2nd generation of headlamp. I have an even lighter one now. But what do I do with my old one? I take it to my office. It becomes office equipment. So again, using headlamps is a nice way to work on tracking activities for the head. We'll also work on turn and clap or turn and catch. Beanbag test, we talked about 20 times head, 20 times eyes. And then our Readalizer demo, again, huge changes in regards to his reading performance. Again, what's interesting to me is his visual verbal recognition of words was fast. It had no problems. But his basic acquisition skills of his eyes going across the page, making less fixations, and making less regressions was important for him. This is one other small thing we looked at was his grade levels based on other areas as well. So again, he made some treatment changes, but what happened is other areas increased, but then they overall were increased. So what happens is that they kind of go through peaks and valleys. They'll make gains, drop off, make gains, drop off. Example again with DEM, we showed her earlier. Okay, curriculum models. Now, what do we use for helping our patients in regards to giving them material that they can use that's helpful? We base it on lots of different models out there. I was taught more in a whole language or top-down approach. There are some people that are very strictly phonics, bottom up. Whereas reading models should be, it should be somewhere in the middle. It shouldn't be purely whole language, shouldn't be purely phonetic, should be a combination approach. To me, there's a book out there called Read Right by D. Tadlock. It's probably the best book I've ever read on reading. I've read a lot. My library, I've got a lot of books on reading and dyslexia. Interactive constructivist theory. The initial stages of acquisition are important, then they work into general comprehension more so, then combined with rapid word recognition so it's really fast, and they have what's called a read-write program. So there's some specific activities. This is their overall model of reading. Here's this one, the microsystem for visual processing. One of the few programs that really talks about vision and its importance to learning how to read. Now, spelling and reading recovery, we talked a little bit about that already. Why work on spelling and visualization? Well, you're doing several things when you're working on spelling. You're working on sustained attention. Head injury patients generally have a hard time staying focused on one aspect. They're into thinking about so many different things all over the place. Again, you have sustained visual attention, helps you load memory. You're also integrating sequential and simultaneous processing aspects. Why work on reading recovery? You work on basic visual skills, right and left hemisphere, speed of processing. Again, we try to give them a little bit of this for more recall, but this right here more for general purposes of reading. Now, traditional spelling approaches. What do most schools of thought have? Basically, they have the kids verbal rehearsal of the words. Cat, C-A-T, cat, C-A-T, cat, C-A-T. Is that sustained attention or not? Not really. It's just repetition, isn't it?
Yes.
I'm not really paying attention to it, am I? Flashcards of words. Did you know there's a book called Einstein Never Used Flashcards? A book called that, actually. Very interesting read. Talks about our infatuation with flashcards, thinking that's the key to learning how to read. Look, cover, remember, write. So what that means is your patient looks at the word, you cover the word, they remember it, and then they write it. So it's a memory activity. Another one is called write each word 5 times and write it 2 times in the sentence. So the word cat, I write cat 5 times, and then I write 2 sentences. The cat is black. The cat is black. Done. Now, what is the benefit to neural networks of reading? Well, you've got probably some benefits in there in regards to some sustained attention, but not to a very high level. What are non-traditional ones? We just showed you what? Ball spelling. Very great activity to work with. Let's throw a little bit of a twist in ball spelling now. So I'm doing, let's say you go ahead and you start doing just Washington for me forwards. Okay, Washington, W, go ahead and start doing it.
Washington, W, A.
Whoa.
Oh.
Uh-oh. I can't hold on anything.
That's part of it.
Yeah, did you notice you stopped?
Yeah.
It wasn't meant to be that way. So you're looking at, you're doing it, go ahead and keep it going.
W, A, S-H-I.
PFLSTOKLNGO.
Then she
You
got
got
mad.
distracted.
Did I distract